Hello everyone, welcome to Mr. Noctory. Today we're visiting the Gerousia, Sparta's Supreme Council, where the oldest, coldest and most powerful men in Greece sat together, not to discuss but to eliminate each other, gently, cleanly and without blood. No knives, no bows, just a slightly wobbly chair, a cup of wine sweeter than usual, and a final toast, never answered. If you think modern politics is brutal, try surviving a closed-door meeting in Sparta, where death came slowly, politely, and was never recorded in history. Before we begin, if you truly find this a cozy place to shelter through the night, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you really want to, no pressure. Like the rules of an old tavern, only stay if you need a place for silence. And do you know what I love the most? Seeing the comments, finding out where you're from and what time it is. Whether it's New York or Norway, 1 a.m. or 5 a.m., you're still here, and I see you. Now turn off the lights, turn on a small fan, if you have one, not for the heat, but for that soft humming sound. And suddenly, you no longer believe a chair is harmless. You've survived 3 major battles, 2 thigh wounds, and 1 argument with your wife that lasted 8 winters. No one expected you to be picked because getting into the Gerousia isn't a test of wisdom, but a contest of who gets shouted for the loudest. In Sparta, people vote by yelling the name of the person they support. Whoever makes the crowd yell longer wins. Whoever is met with silence goes home. You made them scream your name hoarse, not because you're good, but because you outlived everyone else competing for the chair. And now, you're called elder. Not the kind of elder who tells ghost stories to kids, but one of the 28 Spartan men chosen to decide the fate of the whole city-state. You step across the threshold of the Historian Council, the highest seat of power and the lowest level of personal safety. Your hand still slightly trembles under the red toga, the official attire for council members. It's woven from coarse wool, heavy like a blood-stained winter blanket, and smells. Unclear whether it's camphor or the last wearer who didn't make it back. You've just put on not just clothes, but a declaration. I've entered the place where spears don't need to be sharp because words can kill first. They congratulate you before you walk in an old man who once sat in the Gerousia for decades now. Blind in one eye, leans towards you and whispers, "Sit up straight, don't talk much, and never drink the first cup of wine." You nod, not quite understanding, but your gut tells you that wasn't a joke, because if someone survived that room for 30 years, his words are worth memorizing with your bone marrow. You nod like a breathing rock, no emotion, because that's what you're not supposed to show here. But inside, you're thinking, "Dear Apollo, did I just step into a fire pit roofed with honor?" The council door opens, no creak, no welcome. It swallows you whole, as if this isn't a meeting room, but the belly of a giant stone snake. You see them, the 27 other elders, each like an old stone statue, noses broken, but still sitting upright, as if their spines were gifts from the god of war. And in the middle of the room, a line of low wooden chairs, the only thing not covered in Spartan combat training, how to sit and not get killed. You look around, no one smiles, no one greets, no one says congrats. Here, silence is applause, and coldness is the initiation rite. An old silver-haired man, the supreme ephor, points to the last chair in the row. You walk toward it and you stop. You hear something. A tiny cracking sound, not from someone's mouth. From the chair leg, you look closer. One of the four legs is slightly shorter. Looks like it's been re-shimmed with new wood. You're not some green rookie. You once saw a chair like that collapse under another man, and his head snapped back like a jar lid. His name was Cleomenes, an elder who once proposed letting helots learn to read. Just one meeting later, the chair he sat on suddenly broke mid-speech. No one helped. No one flinched. Everyone just quietly watched him fall onto the stone floor, neck first onto the step. The next day, the proposal was withdrawn, and ever since people began to sit a little lighter and speak a lot less. You gently lift the chair, switch it, with the one next to it. No one reacts, no one says a word, but you're certain one of them squinted for just a millisecond, then returned to their statue-like coldness. You sit, the chair holds. Your spine is still yours, heart still beating for now. The council begins the session with a simple invocation. For Sparta's eternity, for traitors to vanish in silence. You sit still, back straight, eyes open. Not a word. You don't know when you'll be tested. You only know the first chair didn't kill you. But there are more chairs, more meetings, more cups of wine, more nods and more eyes like blades hidden behind red togas. Welcome to the Jerusia, where warriors no longer use spears, but silence to measure loyalty, and sometimes gravity to resolve political disagreements, where you survive by speaking less than the man who just died. The first meeting passed like sleepwalking. No one shouted. No one slammed the table. No one spoke more than 2 sentences in a row. The only time in 80 years someone in the Jerusia slammed the table, it was Lysandros, known for his toughness and excessive love of wine. He shouted, "Enough! Helots are people too." The silence that followed was as long as a funeral. 3 days later, he was found, sitting dead in his chair, eyes still open, wine still unfinished, but heart no longer beating. The cause of death was recorded as natural from emotion. The only things that moved were eyes and wine cups. Politics in Sparta wasn't about arguments. It was silent warfare. You didn't debate. You hinted. You didn't oppose. You looked right then, looked left then, nodded slightly as if you agreed with yourself. And if you spoke more than 3 sentences, you'd hear a spoon gently tapping against a cup, not to call a servant, but as a sign. That's enough. Acting through silence. In Athens, you persuade with logic. In Sparta, you're only allowed to sit in the right spot, lower your head at the right time, and breathe at the proper volume. You saw Elder Menephos accidentally clear his throat when someone made a suggestion. The result? That suggestion was killed within 3 seconds. No one asked what Menephos meant. Just clearing his throat was enough to mean he didn't like it. Strange, right? A cough could change the fate of a law. A frown could replace an entire speech. When you don't know who the enemy is, best not to look at anyone at all. You learn that in the Jerusia, everything could be a message. Placing your wine cup on the left means agreement. Placing it in the middle means rejection. Placing it on the edge means someone really hated what you just said. And if someone winks one eye, depends. If it's your friend, maybe a sign of alliance. If it's the F.O., you better start writing a will. And if he winks both eyes and glances at the ceiling, It could be a sign of a small coup, or maybe just dust in his eyes. But don't bet your life on figuring it out. You accidentally touched your chin when an elder talked about raising taxes. That gesture anywhere else means thinking. Here, it was understood as, I think you're useless. The result? 3 days later, at a small banquet, you received a cold smile and a wobbly chair. Death in Sparta is often spoken of in whispers. You heard about another elder, Talos, who once proposed reducing the number of helot guards. He didn't die in the council room. He died 3 days later while washing his hands with warm water and slipped on a completely dry floor. No one investigated. No one asked just a single line. He passed away in peace. And from then on, no one ever brought up reducing slave guards again. Silence is a vote that weighs more than law. You understand that in the Jerusia, saying nothing is a stance. And strangely, in Sparta, real power lies in what's never written down. No one records it. No one teaches it from the start, but everyone knows. Never argue with the Ephor when his ears turn red. Never be the first to stand up after a meeting. The first to stand is often the one who sits forever. There was once an elder who wrote these rules in wax to teach his son. 3 days later, the wax was burned, and the son moved away without leaving an address. A glance is a decree. A silence is a sentence, a nod. Can save a family or destroy it. End of the second meeting, and you're still alive. You walked out of that room like stepping out of a magical ritual. Your whole body exhausted, though all you did was sit straight and keep a cold face. A slave boy carrying a wine tray looked at you and whispered, "How many words did you say today, sir?" You replied, "Not enough to die." He nodded, a nod of someone who understands, because here talking too much is the fastest death, and speaking at the right moment is the oldest survival art in Sparta. You say nothing more because that's how to survive, because truly, the role of a Spartan elder isn't to change anything. It's to witness everything without reacting. You're like someone invited onto a wagon rushing downhill, not to steer, but to wipe the sweat of the one who does. No one asks what you think. They just want you to nod at the right time and stay silent in the right place. And because the Jerusia never liked good storytellers, where you sit, and the chair decides if you live or if you only sit once. The polished black ebony chair was placed in the farthest corner of the room, near the wall, near a column, near a ventilation hole no one ever explained. It was the seat reserved for the youngest member of the Jerusia, which meant you. They said the wood for this chair came from the sacred forest beside the temple of Artemis Orthia, where the ritual beatings of youths took place to train their courage. Blood once soaked into the roots of that tree, and when the tree fell, no one dared touch it, except for the carpenter of the Jerusia. They only said, "The chair will choose the worthy." No one knew whether that was a blessing or a warning. The one who led you there said nothing, just placed a hand on your shoulder and nodded gently. You sat down. The chair didn't creak. You let out a breath, because you'd once heard a saying passed down since Lycurgus, the first lawgiver. If the chair creaks beneath a new body, it is the ancestors' warning. Sparta had no prophets, but chairs knew, and if you heard a groan, you'd best find a way to leave politics before politics leaves you. But at that moment, 3 other elders, unprompted, turned their heads toward you. They didn't speak, they didn't smile, they just stared. You felt like you had accidentally sat on someone's grave. The chair has a memory of its own. They said this chair once belonged to Cleomenes, who died with his neck twisted, then to Talos, who fell from the chair while laughing, and before them, someone whose name no one remembers because he only managed to say one sentence: "I have a proposal." That was the entirety of his political career. One sentence. You knew of a forbidden list, names of those who once sat in this chair and never returned after the third meeting. It wasn't written on paper. It wasn't spoken aloud. Only that, if you dared to lean forward and look under the stone table in the center, you'd see rough carvings, names, dashes, and then blank spaces. The last one was marked with a single word: too soon. Being watched does not mean being noticed. From the corner of your eye you saw the oldest Ephor, named Damaros, staring at you like a blade yet to be sharpened. Every time you moved he lifted his wine cup slightly. Every time you frowned he touched his forehead. You tried to sit perfectly still. He nodded slightly, because maybe he wasn't watching you, but watching the chair. His hand rested beside an old goatskin notebook, and every time the chair made a sound, he made a small dot with charcoal. 3 dots, that person was warned. 5 dots, that person was not invited back. An elder once asked why the Ephor did that. Damaros simply said, "The chair cannot speak, but it can groan." You didn't know if that was a sign of approval or a message. Yes, keep sitting there and I'll see. The feet of the dead once stood here. While someone read a new tax document, you looked down at the floor beneath your chair. There was a dent, as if someone had stomped hard, scratches sharp edges, and something that looked like dried blood. You lifted your own foot away from that spot, but it remained there like it was waiting. By the end of the session, you're still alive, but the chair is not. When everyone stood to leave, you stood as well. A soft crack echoed. You turned the chair, had broken one of its legs. No one said a word. An elder passing by muttered, "It's chosen someone else now." You didn't dare ask who it was, because here lifeless objects had more authority than words, where the sweetest things are signs of what's about to be lost. The first cup of wine, to welcome or to end. The first session ended. You survived. You stood up. You were offered a cup of wine mixed with honey. They called it melikroton. Honey wine once used in farewell rites for warriors no longer allowed to go to battle. In Sparta, to fight was honor, and to not fight anymore was to be sent away. At the Jerusia, this cup wasn't for those about to die. It was for those about to be forgotten. No one forced you to drink. No one stopped you from refusing. Only that everyone was watching. And that cup carried a scent so faint, so sweet, so unfamiliar. They said, the honey in this cup came from the deep forest at the foot of Mount Taygetus, where Sparta once left infants who didn't meet the standard. That flavor wasn't just sweet. It was the final trace of souls who never got names. And now, it rested in your hand. You swirled the wine gently under the firelight. You saw something carved at the bottom of the cup. Letters worn down. Ros. Could be Talos, or Cleomenes, or someone who once sat where you sit. Someone who once lifted this cup and then was erased. Not cleanly. You heard, before Talos fell from his chair, he drank this very wine. Only his cup sat in the center of the table. They said it was a farewell gift for those retiring from political life. An elder once said, "Honey masks the bitterness wine helps forget the truth. And this cup, it reveals who can forget what." A servant stepped forward, holding a silver tray. His face was unremarkable, except you were sure you'd seen him at your predecessor's funeral. No one called his name. No one looked him in the eye. You noticed a small burn on his left wrist, old, but still red, maybe from overheated honey or something more painful. The servant said one sentence without emotion. "May this be your first time drinking, not your last." After the wine, you were invited to the back courtyard. A small ceremony. Everyone smiled. Flowers were tossed into the air. Grapes were laid out on a stone table. You saw one empty chair at the far end of the table. According to Lycurgus's old law, if an elder disappeared without reason, their chair would undergo the catharsis rite, cleansing by black ram's blood. The chair would remain empty for 30 meetings. If no one returned, it would be burned along with white flowers. When asked, you were told, "It's for those who can't come back." You looked back at the Jerusia. A window half closed. A cloak vanished behind a curtain. You weren't sure who it was, or who it once was. You turned to the person beside you, about to ask, "The last one who sat in that chair, where are they now?" That person looked at you, smiled faintly, set their cup down and replied, "I never asked, and I'm still sitting here." You nodded, didn't ask again, and finished the rest of your wine. The sweetness spread, but it wasn't warm. You began to get used to the meetings where people were more silent than they were talkative. You thought you were learning how to keep your words, until you said one seemingly harmless sentence. This time the ephor made a quick decision. Just that one sentence. That evening you found your cloak had been switched, though no one said a word. The fabric was paler, the right fold was longer by a finger's width, and the next morning someone who had sat across from you was suddenly replaced by a face you had never seen. In the corner of the room, there was always someone. Not seated, not speaking, only holding a parchment and black charcoal. He didn't blink, he didn't sneeze, and once you were certain, he wrote down even the words you hadn't yet said. Anyone who asked about him received the same response. Just a note-taker. But that record, no one was ever allowed to see it. Some said, in truth, the record was never written in ink. Each meeting, the important things were embroidered in thread, red, yellow, black, onto the inside of a special cloak. Only one person wore that cloak. That person did not speak, did not sit, did not live like others. And when they died, the cloak was buried with them. No one dared dig it up. Only whispers remained, a cloak containing all the political memory of Sparta, in thread indelible. In the Jerusia, no wall was truly solid, no curtain was truly thick, and no corner was truly private. You happened to overhear someone reciting the elders' names in the wrong order. A few days later, that person no longer appeared. Legend in the Jerusia told that anyone who mispronounced the name of an ephor without permission would be taken away before they could call anyone's name. One was burned, mouth bound with white cloth. No screaming, no sound left behind. Only the smell of ash in the walls remained. An elder once showed you the inside of an old cloak. See the red thread? It sits at the collar. When it turns to gold, it means you've been marked. You looked at your own cloak. saw no thread. An older elder, hand shaking, but eyes still sharp, gently tugged the back of your robe. If it was ever lined with flax, the last wearer may have been one of the cryptia. You shivered. Cryptia, the name everyone knew but never spoke in this room. Young men chosen not to fight, but to observe. Observe silently, and if needed, remove. You didn't know if you should feel relieved or more afraid. From this chapter onward, you were served tea instead of wine. The person brewing the tea didn't speak, didn't look you in the eyes, only bowed. Their sleeve covered half their face. You smelled mint and something like old ash. Then one day, that same tea carried a trace of cinnamon. Another day, rosemary. No one said anything, but you began to understand. Cinnamon was the signal. There's a stranger. Rosemary. Stay silent. A strange sweetness you couldn't place. You're being tested. No one told you whether to drink or not, but everyone raised their cup. And you didn't want to be the only one missing the signal. From now on, you stopped saying what you thought. You learned to speak with your eyes, with the way you placed your hand on the table, with the way you folded your cloak when rising. Because in Sparta, speech was the last thing you should let others hear, where the torchlight speaks more than words, and someone's shadow on the wall is no longer theirs. Sparta had no campaigns, only choosing and being chosen. And the night before that day you didn't sleep. No one did. Not even the guards. Not even the fire crackled. You asked yourself, if they choose you, what does it mean? If they don't choose you, how long have they already seen through you? Then you remembered an old tale. Sparta once had a strange voting method, not by ballots, but by shouting. The announcer would call out the candidate and listen for cheers from the crowd hidden behind the walls. The quieter the cheer, the more trustworthy. If it was too loud, it was deemed dangerous. Jerusalem doesn't choose the beloved, but the one who can hold silence. The torches in the Jerusalem corridor never went out. Before entering the hall, each person had to perform a simple ritual, but one impossible to fake. Wash their hands without water. Place their hand on their chest, hold for a single breath. Anyone who trembled, exposed anyone who breathed quickly, couldn't hide. No one said anything, but in their minds a name was crossed out. That night they lit small oil lamps, placing them along the hallway. Everyone who passed had to look down. Those with trembling hands would spill the oil. Those who spilled left a footprint. And the next morning, that mark would be remembered. Not on paper, in memory. A former elder once said, on the night of selection, every cough, every scratch of the head, every tap of the foot is a vote. You didn't understand, but then you saw someone pretending to sleep, their head tilted ever so slightly toward you. Another adjusted their robe, then glanced. Someone else silently poured wine, but shook their hand 3 times. Perhaps no one really drank anything that night. They were just counting. Who looked up, who looked down, who sighed quietly, who tried not to breathe. Everyone had a small bronze mirror, usually for checking their hair or for reflecting sunlight into the eyes of young soldiers for fun. But that night, all mirrors were turned face down. No one wanted to see themselves, nor accidentally reflect someone else. On the night of selection, everything must be reversed. You were served a light meal. Earlier, in the corner of a low table, someone had quietly placed a silver spoon a rare thing in Sparta. No one asked, no one touched it. But the next morning, the spoon had been bent lying face up on the table of the one who brought it. And that person, once a bright candidate, withdrew without a word. Silver does not rust, but the human heart bends easily. No meat, no bread, only boiled beans and no salt. An elder chuckled. Salt preserves memory, and there are things tonight best forgotten. You ate in silence, not knowing whether to preserve strength or to say goodbye. Before dawn, something strange happened. One of the small oil lamps, the kind used to check footsteps, suddenly went out. Though there was no wind, no one touched it. Everyone nearby stood still. No one relit it. The oldest elder whispered, "There is a flame that refuses to see the future, then let the future look back at it." The next morning, the candidate most expected had vanished from the list. No one asked why no one mentioned a name, but someone remembered. That night, a white goat wandered into the courtyard. No one let it out. It moved slowly, sniffed each stone, stopped in front of one person, then walked away. That person smiled softly, didn't eat dinner, and the next morning withdrew from the list. Pan doesn't speak human, but Sparta hears his footprints. That night, Sparta didn't breathe, only the living, pretending they didn't exist, because tomorrow morning the name that is called is not an honor, but a living sentence signed in contemplation. If you want to change the law, ask yourself, do you also want to change your blood? Sparta doesn't like change. Sparta hates change, because every change is an accusation that the one before was wrong, and the one before is often still alive and still in power. So if you want to change something here, you don't just need a reason. You need a reason to survive after saying it. Years ago, an elder once dared suggest shortening the training time for children. He believed, we don't need more warriors, we need people who can write and can think. 3 days later, he slipped and fell down the stone steps. Steps that had never had moss. No one said anything. But since then, those who propose reforms all learned to walk very slowly on dry ground. You walked into the Jerusalem chamber carrying an idea, a good idea, a correct idea, an idea that would remove at least 3 people from their top seats. You spoke watching reactions, like playing chess with an opponent who wasn't there. No one interrupted, no one agreed, but when you got home, the cloak you'd hung out to dry that morning was gone. In Sparta, whoever loses a cloak is about to lose a role. The next day, you received a new mirror, and then you noticed something strange in the Jerusalem chamber. Behind the always closed red curtain, there was a small door. No one spoke of it. No one admitted it existed, but those who passed through it never appeared in the next meeting. Legend says an Ephor once proposed redistributing power between the king and the people, and was invited to rest through that very door. No indictment, no funeral, just an empty cup left on the meeting table, as if no one had ever sat there at all. Not to reflect, but to remind you. Someone saw your face clearly enough to return it to you. They say that Jerusalem once had a brave man, his name erased from the records. He's only known as the 12th man, because he was the only 12th member to ever ask to change the voting method. He lived exactly 12 days after that proposal, but he wasn't the only one. In the 3rd century BCE, King Cleomenes III tried to reform Sparta's land system, returning ownership to the poor. He cancelled debts. He divided land. He declared, "No one is a citizen if they have nothing to protect." The result? He was opposed by the nobles, forced to flee to Egypt. And there Cleomenes took his own life with 12 knife wounds to the stomach. Historians disagree whether it was despair or a final message to those who held land but not loyalty. On his last day, the 12th man left behind a piece of parchment, unsigned, no ink, only scratched in with a fingernail. "If this law doesn't die, then I died for it." You sat alone by the window. Outside, the clang of armor being forged still echoed. The shouts of children in nighttime training drills. You thought, but before anyone even thinks the word reform, they must walk past the stone statue of Lycurgus, the legendary lawgiver who laid the foundations of all Spartan law. They say before each meeting, if you intend to propose a change, you must whisper your words into the ear of that statue, not for approval, but to see whether by morning you'll still have a voice to say it out loud. Someone once whispered too loudly and woke the next morning with a burning throat and a fishbone in a bowl of porridge no one admitted cooking. Reform in Sparta is not praised. It is only quietly remembered in stone, in wind, and in silences that last longer than they should. In Sparta, being king might be an honor or a two-headed curse. Sparta isn't like anywhere else. While other Greek city-states chose one king, one tyrant, or a democratic council, Sparta chose both. Two kings ruling together, sitting together, just not looking at each other for too long. You might think, oh, two kings must be fairer. No, it's like two cats sharing one bowl, and that bowl only has one fish, or in this case, one wine jug. That wine jug is real. Some say it was once part of a failed plot. One spring night, someone secretly poured in a bit of fermented honey, mixed with poisonous sap. Just one sip would cloud the mind, but in the end, the server handed it to the mastermind by mistake. That king slept for 3 days straight, and when he woke up, power was no longer in his hands. No investigation, no prosecution. Since then, the jug was marked with a small scratch on its handle, a reminder that, in Sparta, wine can make friends or make ends. Made of silver, only used during council meetings when both kings were present. It symbolized unity, and it symbolized the kind of conflict no one is allowed to name. Whoever pours first wins. But if you pour too much, you might be suspected of wanting it all. They were chosen from 2 different bloodlines. Agiad line, traditional, stern, thick-skinned but unreadable. Eurypontid line, pragmatic, cunning, smiles a lot and rarely means it. One king handled foreign affairs, leading wars, signing treaties. The other handled domestic matters, keeping the peace and quelling uprisings. But the problem is, war is always more admired than peace. So one usually travelled far and earned glory. The other stayed home and heard rumours about himself. Once, an Agiad king returned from an Asian campaign, only to find his throne had a different impression. No one said a word. But from then on, the wine jug was always filled equally for both, even if neither drank. The wine never emptied, but trust was no longer poured in. Sparta had a law. If one king went to war, the other had to stay home. The reason? To maintain stability. But everyone knew. So if one falls, the other stays, to explain. No one dared say they hated each other. No one dared say they trusted each other. Every word was overheard by the ephors sitting in the corner pretending to season their salt. Before that winter night there had been other nights, hot and bitter. History records, Demaratus and Cleomenes, two Spartan kings of the same era, once launched a rare political assassination. Cleomenes, of the Aegeid line, secretly allied with an effort to accuse Demaratus of being illegitimate and strip him of power. Demaratus lost his title, was forced to leave Sparta, and then, ironically, he joined enemy Persia. Since then, an unspoken rule spread among future kings. If you can't share the throne, make sure the other has no ground to stand on. One winter night, they were invited to a Jerusia feast. They were seated 4 chairs apart, supposedly to leave space for the goddess Artemis in between. The younger king still buzzed from a recent victory reached for the wine jug, but the other didn't look. He stared at the fire. The flames flickered across his face, unmoving, unreactive eyes seeing something far away. That night, he didn't return to the palace. He went straight to the northern temple. Sitting alone beneath the bronze statue, he pulled from his cloak an old letter, handwritten in his own script, addressed to himself. If the day comes when trust is gone, drink alone, but don't let anyone know the wine has lost its taste. 2 kings, 1 table, 1 jug. And when the one pouring wine was a newly arrived slave girl from Argos. Her hand trembling, the wine splashed over both kings' hands. The whole hall fell silent. No one wiped it away. That was the last night the 2 kings sat together. The next morning, Sparta announced, "No king has died, only one has been chosen to remain silent longer." The empty throne was wiped with a red cloth. The silver jug was never used again. It was hung on the wall right behind the ephors' seats to remind everyone. Power in Sparta does not belong to the strongest. It belongs to the one who can drink without getting drunk. Not everyone who dies disappears, but in Sparta, sometimes surviving is the best way to be forgotten. In Athens, if you do wrong, you're exiled. In Thebes, if you lose, you're mocked. But in Sparta, you're forgotten. Not because people don't remember you, but because the law of silence forces everyone to act as if you never existed. There's a list. No one keeps it, but everyone knows it. A list of those once honored, then vanished as if they never were. No tombstone, no funeral, no mention in epic poems. Only strange gaps in the chronicles. Between the reigns of 2 kings, there is a blank. From Senator number 78, we skip straight to Senator 80. People call it the technique of memory cleansing. No blood, no sword, just never saying the name again. There was an ephor named Thoetimus, who once proposed shifting some power from the Jerusia to the people. He spoke to the council in a warm, persuasive voice and received the longest applause of that winter. The next week, he vanished. No explanation, no trial. A year later, his student brought a copy of his speech to the archives asking to store it. The archivist looked at him and asked, "Who is Thoetimus?" A king, Charalaeus of the Eurypontid line, once refused to wage war against Sparta's ally, Messenia. He believed the strong don't need cruelty to be called great. The people admired him. One summer later, he fell ill and withdrew from politics. In the records, he never ruled. No document holds his name, except for a clay shard in the back wall of the market. Charalaeus, the one who refused to rule by the sword. In Sparta, no one is condemned for kindness, they are simply made invisible. On the Jerusia stone table, whenever a senator dies, he is replaced with a new painted mark. Red means blood spilled in battle, black means death in the temple. But if there is no color, that's someone who has been erased. The strangest story is about a youth, Irenikos, a top student in training school. He once publicly challenged an ephor quoting the words of Lycurgus himself. The whole school fell silent. A week later, Irenikos was no longer seen. His name was scratched off the student list. His room assigned to someone new. His belongings burned to prevent superstition. Only a single line was scribbled on the dining hall wall. If you still remember me, then I haven't disappeared. A goatskin record, hidden beneath the base of the Lycurgus temple, contained a warning from a vanished member of the Jerusia. No one dared read it aloud, but students passed it around. Inside it read, "Sparta doesn't kill you with swords, they kill you with organized silence. If you still remember me, then I haven't disappeared." There is no cemetery for these names. There are even rumors of a ritual, the erasure ceremony, reserved for those removed from official memory. It takes place at midnight with no drums or trumpets. 4 ephors in black cloaks holding torches descend into the archives beneath the temple of Artemis. The name is written on parchment, then burned before the goddess's statue. The ashes are mixed with water, poured onto the stone floor of the council chamber. From the next day on, no one may speak of them. No one may keep a picture. No one may say their name. And if a child asks, "Who was this person?" you must answer, "No such person ever existed." No incense, only the memory of the storyteller. And a silent curse. In Sparta, forgetting is a punishment, but remembering too much can also be a crime. In Sparta, they don't like those who disrupt the order. Even heroes should know when to stay quiet. He returned to cheers from the battlefield of Thermopylae, not with 300 men, but with only himself still alive. They called him the last ghost of Leonidas. He, Damaretus, the one who broke 3 spears and killed a Persian general with bare hands. He was awarded a laurel wreath, stood in the middle of Sparta Square. People gifted him honey children, waved fabric flags and ran after him. 7 days later, he died in the bath slipping and hitting his head. No witnesses, no public funeral, no investigation. Some said he was too exhausted. Some said he took his own life because he couldn't bear the empty praises. But an old incense seller in front of Apollo's temple whispered, "He asked too many questions." And in Sparta, if you ask too much, you either go into the woods or go take a bath. Before he died, Damaretus once spoke a sentence at the council that made the room go silent for 17 seconds. "If I can survive hell, then I can also ask, why did you never send anyone to rescue us?" No one answered. 3 days later, the oil jar in his bath was replaced. There was a strange smell. No one investigated. A week after his death, his statue was moved into storage. No one knew the reason. But a few days later, a child, the son of the archive keeper, recounted seeing his father holding a scroll sealed with a strange red mark. The man went straight to Athena's temple, stood silently before the altar for a long time, then burned the scroll before his child's astonished eyes. When the child asked what it was, he mumbled, "A thank you letter from a soldier who no longer exists." No one checked again. No one recorded it. The scroll, if it existed, turned to ash right before the eyes of a goddess of wisdom. At the same time, there was a strange report from the armory. The bronze shield, engraved with a scorpion, the one Damaretus carried in the Battle of Thermopylae, was reported missing after an inventory check. The reason recorded was brief. Slight burn due to ceremonial candle. But the warehouse guard whispered that there had been no fire. Only a group of strangers wearing the Jerusia insignia, who came in the middle of the night, then left with a wooden chest wrapped in red cloth. No one mentioned it again. No one asked. In folk tales, it is said Damaretus didn't die. He was only forced to change his name sent across the Arcadia border. They're a strange man, long hair, never bathed, always telling old stories, began teaching children that courage is not in wounds, it's in daring to speak in the most dangerous place, the council. 7 years later, a child drew a warrior in charcoal on the school wall. Below the drawing was the line, Damaretus didn't die, he just changed form, so people wouldn't be afraid to remember him. In Sparta, death doesn't always come from a blade. Sometimes it comes from a nod, or from a silence that lasts just a little too long. There was a man. No one knew his real name. In documents, he was called the Vote Messenger. Not a member of the Jerusia, not an Epher. He didn't wear a red cloak, didn't bear the lion insignia. But every time a vote was cast, he was the last to walk the line quietly, whispering the result into the ear of the one at the top. He didn't write, didn't speak publicly, didn't feast, only drank water, and sometimes counted fingers. Every time a councilman was removed or disappeared for health reasons, he was seen at that room the night before. He brought nothing, just sat on a chair, stared straight at the victim, said nothing, just nodded slightly, and left before the moon reached its peak. No one ever saw him kill, but after he left someone's house, that person never appeared on any list again, not even in prayers. An old Epher once drunkenly muttered, "There are 3 ways to die in Sparta. 1 is to die on the battlefield. 2 is to die in the bath. 3 is to be looked at by him. 3 times." Scholar Plutarch recorded a strange tale on a winter's night. A young warrior begged to leave politics to return home and care for his sick mother. The next day, both mother and son were listed as fallen at the frontier, though no one saw them leave the city. The one who recorded the names was still the man who didn't hold a pen, didn't speak aloud, just walked past and whispered to the ledger keeper. They said he was once an assassin during the war, but swore never to kill with his own hands again. Instead, he chose another weapon, consensus. In Sparta, there were no public death sentences for politicians, no blood on the walls, no trials were ever recorded, only one kind of disappearance, as if the person had never existed. And every time it happened, the Jerusia gatekeeper would light a candle, then snuff it exactly 3 minutes later, said nothing, left no ashes, only an empty room and a chair. No one dared sit in again. There was a strange rumor among Spartan soldiers that one person once escaped his gaze, the only one. His name was Theoxenes, a young guard once stationed near the Jerusia. One winter council session, the man appeared, stared directly at Theoxenes 3 times. But Theoxenes didn't vanish. Instead, just a few days later, he was reassigned to the island of Sidera. a place of stone wind, and an old outpost. 3 years later, he returned, with hollow eyes and a trembling voice. He spoke of the man's stare, not angry, not threatening, just empty, as if reciting some ancient incantation only souls once called by name could understand. That story was recorded, then vanished from the chronicles exactly 3 days later. There was also a time when 3 young ephors secretly met, planning to reform the voting process in the Gerousia. The meeting happened before dawn. Only yellow candles and a map of the old city spread across the floor. And he, uninvited, unannounced, walked in. No one knew how, said nothing, just sat. The 3 ephors silently looked at one another, as if all breath had been drained from them. The meeting ended in 5 minutes. 3 days later, all 3 submitted resignation letters citing incompatibility with the spirit of ancient consensus. The meeting's minutes were sealed with black wax, a top-secret mark used only when something shouldn't be spoken aloud. As for his true identity, no document ever recorded it. In the archives, every time his name came up, there was only a small drawing, an empty hand, no fingers, no flesh. Some scholars believed it symbolized power without form. Others thought it was the mark of an underground organization from wartime, where executioners were forbidden to leave biological traces. When historian Demetrius publicly questioned this symbol during a lecture, he was asked to leave the hall, and his home library later burned down without clear cause. Because in Sparta, death is not always the end. Sometimes it's just a seat already chosen. You walk into the Gerousia on a foggy morning. No drums, no guards, no one in the room, except 14 eyes staring at you from the circle of stone chairs. And one empty chair, reserved for you, lies in the center, not beside, not behind, but in the middle of the circle. You stand there, heart-pounding, palms sweating under your woolen robe. No one speaks, no one gestures. Only an old ephor gives a small nod, and suddenly they all look down. On the stone chair meant for you there's a small, fine-etched line. Whoever once betrayed the will of silence shall hear everything, one last time. You don't understand, or you've already understood, but hoped it was a joke. You sit down. The circle closes, the doors of the Gerousia shut behind you, soundlessly. 3 people speak one by one. No one says your name. No one states the exact reason. They only speak of a councilman who once tried to propose changes to the ephor election process, who had shown doubt about the integrity of the ancient consensus. They don't need to say your name, because the chair you're sitting on has done it for them. Wind whistles through the wall's cracks. You feel cold. You feel the room tilt slightly, as if you're sitting at the center of a giant scale. The last to speak is an old friend, someone who once drank wine with you during the winter festival. His voice is hoarse. He doesn't look at you. He looks at the chair. His presence was once an honor. And then silence. A long pause, as if no one knows whether to applaud or bow. You try to speak, but your throat is so dry not a sound escapes. When you are led out, not through the main door, but through a small one in the back, you realize it's not an exit. It's a tunnel, leading down, down, down. And finally, it opens to a small, empty room, with just one chair, exactly like the one you just sat on. On it is etched, one last time, to never rise again. In Sparta, no one is executed, no one is sentenced. there are only chairs that are chosen. And one day you realize, sometimes death doesn't come from a dagger, but from sitting in the right place for too long. Old Kingdom, around 2613 to 2181 before the Common Era. The Old Kingdom was marked by monumental architecture meant to honor the gods and consolidate royal power. King Joser, around the year 2670, before the Common Era, ordered the construction of the first step pyramid at Saqqara, designed by Imhotep, the vizier, who was also a physician and architect. Imhotep is also considered one of the first to compile medical texts, presenting treatments for over 200 illnesses and proposing that disease might have natural causes instead of solely divine punishment. The peak of the Old Kingdom lies in the three pyramids at Giza: the Great Pyramid of Khufu from 2589 to 2566 before the Common Era, the Pyramid of Khafra from 2558 to 2532 before the Common Era, the Pyramid of Menkore from 2532 to 2503 before the Common Era. These structures were originally clad in white limestone shining under the sun, representing wealth, power, and extraordinary technical prowess. Scholars still debate how the ancient Egyptians transported and positioned these massive stone blocks. Before Joser kings were buried in mastabas, flat rectangular tombs lying low to the ground. But Joser didn't want to rest quietly beneath the sand. He wanted to be remembered, not just as a ruler, but as a bridge between humans and the divine. And so he summoned someone special. His name was Imhotep, not yet a god. He was a vizier, an architect, a doctor, a high priest. He wore no armor, held no whip, only carried an idea in his mind, and then began to sketch what no one had thought possible. At Saqqara, where winds whisper through sand dunes and scattered bones, he ordered stone blocks to be stacked, not once, but 6 times, step by step, layer by layer, like a ladder for the soul to ascend. But don't forget, the step pyramid was only the center of a much larger complex. Imhotep didn't just build a tomb. He designed a city for the dead. Tall white limestone walls nearly 10 meters high surrounded it, protecting the soul from the outside world. The Hebsed court, where King Joser rehearsed immortality through running rituals and strength-restoring ceremonies. Columns carved to resemble bundles of reeds, symbolizing rebirth, forming a corridor like walking through time itself. Imagine yourself walking between those columns. Wind brushes through stone gaps. Echoes return like whispers from spirits not yet gone. And you, a living soul, begin to wonder whether you just crossed the border between 2 worlds. There's a detail rarely told. Before laying the first stone, they had to master the ground itself. Imhotep ordered Saqqara's terrain to be cleared, leveled, and precisely measured. A very unusual thing back then, when most things were close enough. The Egyptians used primitive tools like knotted measuring cords to draw straight lines, and a system based on the sun's shadow to find true directions. But more important was how they moved stone. Tons of limestone were hauled across desert sands. No cranes, no wheels. Just people in headscarves pouring water on the sand ahead, making the surface slick, so the blocks could slide. A technique so simple it's hard to believe, but it worked. On the worksite, teams were divided. Some pulled, some commanded, some beat drums. A symphony of sacred construction. Drums echoed. Stones clashed, voices shouted through skin-scorching heat. No forges, no magic, only perseverance turning rock into statement. Djoser's step pyramid rose nearly 60 meters tall, built entirely of stone, at a time when most of the world still lived in mud. No machines, no cargo trucks, only humans, ropes, levers, and belief. You didn't have to be Pharaoh to stand before it and feel a chill, because it wasn't just a tomb. It was a silent declaration in stone. The king does not die, the king climbs the sky. And you, even if just a meal bringer for the workers, would feel small in its shadow. They weren't chained, they weren't whipped. They were laborers, artisans, the world's first engineers. They had bread, beer, a place to sleep, even doctors. And when one died by falling stone, they were buried near the pyramid, as if journeying with the king toward eternity. You might not read hieroglyphs, but you see clearly. This was labor, not bondage. In Egyptian culture, death wasn't the end. It was a journey, a passage through the duat, the afterlife, where your heart would be weighed, where you needed a name, a title, a tomb, a rite, and a pyramid was the most powerful passport for that journey. Imhotep knew that Djoser knew that. And even the stone carvers sweating under brutal sun knew that. That pyramid wasn't the biggest, but it was the first. And thanks to it, Egypt entered a new era, an age of things greater than death. Imhotep would later be worshipped as the god of medicine. Djoser, still resting in the desert, still watches you through thousands of years of dust. And you, listening to this story at 3 a.m., might ask yourself, what have I left behind in this world? A stone, a song, a name. And maybe, in a strange dream, you'll find yourself standing in the pyramid's shadow, laying your hand on a cool stone and falling silent. His name was Khufu, and he didn't want a pyramid. He wanted the pyramid, capitalized, bolded, carved in stone, not so that everyone could see it, but so that no one couldn't. If Djoser built a ladder for the soul, Khufu built an artificial mountain, right in the heart of the desert. Something no one could ignore, not when you're alive, not when you're dead, not even 1,000 years later. Imagine standing before Giza. In front of you is a massive triangle, nearly 147 meters tall. When it was newly finished, it was coated in white limestone shining under the sun like a beacon for the entire afterlife. You squint, dazzled, overwhelmed. So small you're afraid to breathe too hard. Khufu didn't just leave behind stone. He left behind a mystery. To this day, no one is entirely sure how the Egyptians hauled and arranged the stone blocks, each over 2 tons, millions of them. They had no wheels, no iron, no cranes, only people, ropes, ramps, wooden rollers, and willpower as solid as rock. And then one day, someone found a journal, not from Khufu, but from a man named Mera, a labor captain, a stone transporter. His notes were found at Wadi el-Jarf, an ancient Red Sea port. On sheets of papyrus, Mera described how he and his team transported limestone from Tura to Giza by boat. We went from the harbour to the pyramid of Akhet Khufu, he wrote. No embellishment, no mythology, just a work report. But that's what gives you chills. Not the drama of the tale, but the living proof. The Great Pyramid wasn't magic. It was hundreds of people like Mera, rowing, ramping, stacking stone under 113-degree heat, over and over, day after day. Not to carve their own names, but to build a shadow for someone else's. Some theories say they built spiral ramps around the pyramid, pushing the stones in stages. Others say they used scaffolds and lifted the stones with wooden pulleys. Still others say they knew something we don't, and that's how legends begin. Khufu left no speeches, no grand inscriptions, no towering statues. Only a small chamber inside the Great Pyramid. No mummy, just an empty stone coffin. Silent, as if he wanted the silence of stone to be his final word. Some call him a tyrant, others a genius. And people today, they look up and wonder, could we build this again with human hands in 20 years? Or is this something only time itself can do? For Khufu, death wasn't a loss. It was a chance to cast an immortal shadow. That shadow was the pyramid. And you, even in the 21st century, standing before it can't help but shiver. Not because it's scary, but because it exceeds what a single human should be capable of. In the shadow of that pyramid, you are no one. Just a small person trying to grasp that once someone dared to think, I will ascend to the sky, and I will not use clouds, I will use stone. And Khufu did it. But don't forget, he didn't do it alone. In that stone shadow, thousands of laborers, artisans, foremen, captains left their nameless fingerprints. One of the strangest clues came from graffiti found inside the stones. Not from the empire, but from the builders. The Friends of Khufu, a crew name. The Drunkards of Khufu, another team. They were like friend group nicknames on a job site. And sometimes they were jokes or marks tracking batches of stone. Not ceremonial, human. And it's exactly those hastily written lines that make you feel closer to a structure that seems impossible. Not because of the stone, but because of the writing. Would you like me to tell you the rest now? When you look at the Great Pyramid, you might think, it must have taken hundreds of thousands of slaves to build this. Hollywood taught you that the Bible says so, but archaeology doesn't. The truth, no whips, no shackles, no traces of chains. The only thing that remains are small stone villages near Giza. Called the Workers' Village, this place wasn't a temporary camp. It was an organized settlement. Grain storage, bakeries, beer workshops, even fermented water tanks. Their archaeologists found tons of cattle bones, neatly chopped, stacked in batches. This shows workers ate meat regularly, a rare privilege in ancient Egypt. This wasn't a slave's ration. It was nourishment for the important. Pyramid builders were treated as national assets because each one was a link in the pharaoh's colossal political, religious, technological machine. Their archaeologists found kitchens where people grilled meat, baked bread, brewed beer. They found a medical camp with bones set and splintered, signs of a community that cared for one another. They found graves right next to the pyramid where builders were buried with offerings, protective amulets, as if they didn't just work for the pharaoh, but were accompanying him to the afterlife. You begin to realize this wasn't a forced workforce. These were people who believed they were touching eternity. They were laborers, but also engineers, mathematicians, stone artisans, logistics commanders. They were divided into teams called phylae, each with his own role. Those who hauled stones from quarries, those who built the inclined planes, those who aligned the pyramid to within less than 0.05 degrees of true north. People call that ruthless precision. I call it unsigned art. And sometimes they did sign. not with pens, but with lime and charcoal. On stones inside the pyramid, archaeologists found handwritten notes, the friends of Khufu, the drunkards of Khufu. Not curses, not rebellion, but a bit of pride. A worker's joke like a student group scribbling on the lab wall. We were here and we made this. Graffiti from 4,500 years ago. And the whispered voices of anonymous hands. There were craftsmen who spent their whole lives shaping just one corner. No name left behind, only perfect angles. There were people who kept the drumbeat, so 100 men could pull in unison. No statue ever carved for them, but if they missed a beat, the stone would crush everyone. And there were some, maybe orphans or sons of farmers, who joined the construction crew as a chance to change their lives. They learned a trade, they ate better, they became part of something larger than themselves. The modern world may not remember their names, but the stones do. Stones remember the chisel marks, remember the sanding strokes, remember the sweat and laughter baked into the sun. And when you press your ear to a stone at Giza, you might hear people calling each other by nicknames, telling jokes during a break, someone humming softly like a quiet prayer for safety. That wasn't a construction site. It was a massive creative studio. Can you imagine it? A long sloping ramp, wooden planks under the stones, water poured on the sand to help it slide, drum beats echoing, ropes tight as harp strings. And in the middle of it all, one artisan whispers, "Just a little more, the whole world is waiting on this stone." Not everyone believed in gods, but everyone believed in being part of something eternal. So if someone asks you, who built the pyramids, you can answer, not slaves, but those without statues carved in their name who left their fingerprints in eternity. And tonight, if you're lying in the dark in a city where no one remembers anyone's name, close your eyes and imagine you are placing a stone on the eternal tower of your own life. No one has to know. It just has to fit. When Khufu passed away, his great pyramid stood tall as an eternal declaration. I am the peak no one can surpass. But who dares to let their father become too large a shadow? Who dares to live after a monument without becoming a faded silhouette? Khafra, Khufu's son, responded with stone. He didn't build a taller pyramid than his father. He chose a smarter way. He built it on higher ground, and so from afar, Khafra's pyramid looks almost as tall as Khufu's, though in reality it's a few meters shorter. A little optical illusion, a little psychological strategy, a little from a son who wanted to stand beside his father, not beneath him. Khafra's pyramid still retains its polished limestone casing at the top, like a leftover crown from a golden era. Back then, the entire pyramid was covered with white Tura limestone, polished smooth like a mirror. When the sun hit it, the whole structure reflected dazzling light like a divine torch in the desert. But over the millennia, most of that outer shell was stripped away, used to build churches, fortresses, and nameless walls in Cairo. Only a few pieces remain near the top, like the last traces of makeup on a stone statue worn down by wind and sand. A beauty no longer whole, but enough for people to whisper how radiant it once was. At his feet lies the strangest figure in Egypt, a lion-bodied human-faced creature resting its chin in eternal watch, the great Sphinx of Giza. It was carved from a single block of limestone, nearly 73 meters long, over 20 meters tall. As if Mother Earth rose up and a human face was grafted onto an animal body. Not a disjointed construction, but a complete symbol of order and guardianship. On summer solstice days, the sun rises directly between the Sphinx's front paws, as if a cosmic ritual was fixed in place, not by gods, but by engineering and astronomy. Many scholars believe the Sphinx's face is that of Khafra himself, a king carving himself onto a lion's body, not to intimidate but to silently guard his tomb and his father. And what about Menkora? If Khufu represents greatness, Khafra represents balance, then Menkora represents kindness and refinement. His pyramid is much smaller, only half the height of his father's and grandfather's, but it's clad in red Aswan granite, a hard and precious stone. He didn't build bigger, he built with heart. The statue of Menkora with two goddesses, Hathor and a provincial deity, was found near his tomb. The three stand side by side with no threat in their stance, no commanding posture. Just three human figures with hands placed on one another like gentle protection. No longer cold authority, but a tenderness with eternal quality. The pyramid race wasn't about who went taller, but who carved themselves into eternity with more depth. The father created a peak. The son created the gaze to guard that peak. The grandson created a space where people could touch divinity without fear. And when they passed, from Khufu to Khafra to Menkora, each had a tomb, a mortuary temple, and a causeway connecting the embalming site to where the gods reside. It wasn't just architecture, it was ritual, a way for death to be written as poetry and fear to become a journey. Ancient Egyptian funerary rites didn't close with ashes, they opened with a whisper. The pharaoh will rise again every morning like the rising sun. People believed the king's soul would pass through Osiris's grand hall, have his heart weighed against the feather of Maat, and if worthy, rise from the pyramid's peak as an eternal ray of light. If you ever visit Giza, try standing in the afternoon shadow of the three pyramids. The wind blows through like an ancient whisper. We once lived and built this. And maybe you'll catch the faintest smile on the Sphinx's face as your shadow stretches. Beside the ancients, in ancient Egypt, death wasn't the end. It was a doorway, opening into a journey, long, dangerous, full of trials, for a soul to become Aku, one who has been purified. In other words, you don't die, you move, and your new home lies beyond the sunset in the realm of the gods. But this isn't a 3-day, 2-night vacation. This is a permanent migration, where you must bring everything you need, from clothes, shoes, food, to spells, prayers, and your soul. A religion that doesn't preach, but simulates the world. Egyptians had no Bible, no Sunday sermons, no savior promising to do it all for you. Instead, they had texts buried with the dead, prayers written in red ink, mouth-opening rituals, magic chants, and embalmers more skilled than surgeons. They didn't need salvation, they needed guidance, and the map for crossing to the next world was written densely on coffins' tomb walls even, on linen wrappings. The afterlife, not a heaven. No, there were no clouds, no harps, no glowing white angels. The afterlife, Duat, was a black desert. There were fire snakes, boiling lakes, soul-eating beasts. To get through you needed to have a heart lighter than a feather, of Maat, the goddess of justice. Know the passwords of 42 judging gods, and remember to bring spells, figurines, and a good pair of sandals. Yes, they really buried the dead with sandals, because you can't arrive if you can't walk. They didn't embalm just to preserve the body like a souvenir. They did it because the soul couldn't return if it didn't recognize its own body. Organs were removed and placed in 4 canopic jars, each guarded by a beast-headed god. The heart was kept to be weighed. The brain was scooped out because they didn't value the brain. Maybe they were right. The mummification process lasted 70 days, with priest rituals and professional mourners, because if not enough people cried, the dead might think they weren't remembered. Grave goods. You can't go empty-handed. Ancient Egyptians believed that whatever you needed in life, you needed in the afterlife too. So they buried you with mirrors and combs, bread beer, a Senate game board, and dozens of little Ushabti figurines, servant dolls ready to work for you in the next world. Imagine dying and still having to farm. No, that's why you need figurines to do it for you. They prepared as if living again. And to them, it wasn't faith. It was a certainty. When you stroll through the tombs of Saqqara or Giza, you'll see poems written for the deceased, inscriptions, "I live in the heart of those who remember me," statues gazing east, awaiting the sunrise. And you'll understand, death to them wasn't sorrow. It was a sacred ritual with the hope that the departed wouldn't vanish, but merely step into another sky, where the stars are old souls, where light is a prayer still echoing. There were no clashing weapons, no invading hooves, no horrifying massacre that plunged ancient Egypt's old kingdom into crisis. There was only a river that began to weaken, a management system that swelled like stale bread, and a faith in the pharaoh beginning to crack when the Nile was no longer generous. For thousands of years, the Nile was Egypt's food printer. Each year, it flooded, spreading fertile silt across the delta. But toward the end of the Old Kingdom, that cycle began to stutter. The waters didn't rise. Fields couldn't be planted. Stores ran dry. Bread, once handed out daily to citizens and pyramid builders, became a luxury. No grain, no beer, no hope. A society that no longer slept in fullness began to dream of the old days, when bureaucracy became a plague. The pharaoh was the shepherd of the people, indeed, but he didn't do it alone. He had priests, viziers, overseers, scribes, statisticians, granary managers, ritual directors, and so on and so forth. At first, this system helped society run like a fine-tuned machine, but gradually, everyone wanted a title. Everyone wanted to be buried with riches like nobility, and everyone asked for more privileges. There is evidence that by the end of this period, local regions began to break away from the central government. The heads of provinces, nomarchs, began building their own tombs, conducting their own rituals, managing their own resources. In other words, the central authority fragmented. When noble tombs rose, pyramids stood still. No more giant pyramids. No more stone statues requiring thousands of laborers. Instead, provincial nobles competed to build private tombs. But unlike Khufu or Khafra, these people didn't need legends. They just needed a place big enough to flaunt their possessions, an artisan to carve their names on tomb walls, and a statue of themselves, gazing toward the grain. The pyramid became an outdated symbol, no longer a divine peak, but a decorative item no one could afford. Lamentation texts, the cries of an era. From this time, people began to record laments, inscriptions speaking of a collapsing society, decaying morals, and the dead not receiving proper rights. The poor robbed the graves of the rich. Children no longer listen to their fathers. Rituals are forgotten. Corpses drift down the river. No more gods, only complaints. A civilization that once built a 146-meter pyramid could no longer manage a clean well. No collapse, only quiet unraveling. No one officially declared the old kingdom fallen. No state funeral, only small cracks spreading gradually. And then, one day, no one had enough power to give orders. No one had enough grain to hire workers. No one was called Child of Ra. Only many local lords remained, each with a tomb, a small group of followers, and a name no one remembers. And so, the old kingdom didn't fall because of a stronger enemy, but because it had swelled too wide, dried up inside its river, and quietly sank into dust. You can't forget something that's still standing after 4,500 years. Some structures are built to be used, some are built to be displayed, and some are built to prevent forgetting. The Great Pyramid of Giza is not a place meant for daily visits. It has no windows, no signs. It's not a palace, not a castle. It is a declaration in stone. When stone became a prayer, the ancient Egyptians didn't build tombs just to bury. They built tombs to preserve identity, because if your name is forgotten, your soul vanishes too. The names of Khufu, Khafre, Menkaure were carved into stone, not to glorify, but to endure. Whether you believe they were great pharaohs or control freaks, they're still spoken of after 4,500 years, and the pyramid still stands. When every empire takes a photo with the pyramid, from Napoleon to Western explorers to TikTok-era selfie tourists, everyone who comes to Giza does one thing: takes a picture with the stones, then calls it a dream come true. During World War II, German soldiers also once stood in the desert and gazed at the pyramid. No one knows what they thought. Only that they didn't bomb it. Because even in war, humans still know to step back before eternity. When modern science still guesses, even with ground-penetrating radar drones and satellite images, we still don't fully understand how the pyramid was built. Some theories say ramps, some say water-based levers, some mention aliens. Yes, seriously. The strange thing is, we can build robots that write poetry, but we still can't recreate a pyramid by hand the way our ancestors did. And when you stand before it, it won't feel like it does in pictures. Desert wind scrapes sand across your cheeks. You tilt your head back and realize you're just a speck in front of an ancient block. No one calls you a tourist anymore. No more TikTok. No more tips like left angle looks better. Only you and a stone mass that survived 4,500 years of sandstorms, war, religion, and forgetting. You can't feel nothing. You might not remember the pharaoh's name. You might forget who Imhotep was. You might confuse Giza with Luxor. But you won't forget that someone once believed so strongly they dared to build this. And sometimes that very belief is the last thing left behind when everything else has faded into dust.